Greetings from Dubai and Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, the tourism industry lost an estimated 1.3 trillion in export revenue in 2020. The travel industry's recovery will be slow as the new COVID-19 variants are causing governments to continue using travel bans to stem the spread. Travel experts are now very cautious in their outlook, with the majority not expecting a return to pre-pandemic levels before 2023. While the brief recovery in the summer months of 2020 had fueled hopes of a quick recovery for the tourism sector, those hopes have been dashed by the spreading of the new strains, making most travel experts very cautious in their outlook. Despite of all efforts from all over the world to make safe international travel a possibility, we are aware that the crisis is far from over. Ladies and gentlemen, today I am delighted to introduce our special guest who has come from the region of Asia and Pacific, Madame Dr. Rebecca Fatima Santa Maria, Executive Director, Apec Secretary, Singapore. Welcome, Doctor. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining our platform today. So APEC is which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, is the
cooperation.
Cooperation is the premier Asia Pacific Economic Forum. The primary goal is to support sustainable economic growth and prosperity in the Asia Pacific region. APEC are united in your drive to build a dynamic and harmonious Asia Pacific community by championing free and open trade, investments, and promoting and accelerating regional economic integration, encouraging technical cooperation, enhancing human security, and facilitating a sustainable business environment. Tourism being a major vertical, you formed a working group, a tourism working group in 1991 as a platform for tourism administrators of APEC economies to share information, exchange views, and develop areas of cooperation in tourism, trade, and policies to support growth in the region. Asia Pacific has at the same time biggest proportion of total border closures compared to other regions, reflecting local governments' relative caution that has curbed confirmed COVID-19 cases numbers, but heavily impacted air traffic recovery. The latest reports in February 2021, Asia Pacific countries accounted for 30 of the 69 destinations that were fully shut to tourists, double that of Europe's 15 destinations, and outnumbering Africa's 11 destinations, the Americas 10, and the Middle East 3. What are the current challenges for the APEC facing in the COVID-19 era?
Thank you, Samari. Thank you very much to the WTFI for this kind of invitation for us to share some of the perspectives of APEC when it comes to tourism. Yes, this is one of our challenges this couple of years. We didn't see it coming, and the crisis is worse, far worse than the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. And we work very hard. We are putting our minds together on how we can bring about the recovery across, a broad recovery across the region. One of our concerns and the challenges is that even as we're talking of recovery, it is uneven. Some of our economies are moving faster than others. We have 21 economies, and if you look across the region, you will see that some have managed the pandemic better than others. Most of us are still struggling. So the strength of APEC is that we are able to meet and share best practice, and have this exchange of information about how we are dealing with the pandemic, how we can help each other, learn from each other's experience. I think that's the value of this regional grouping.
Right. I mean, you've made so 21, when you say you have 21 economies, that means those are your 21 members, if I'm right.
That's right.
And you've made a very, very profound comment here, which says that there's uneven recovery. and that makes your job so difficult. That's I think that's the key, and that's what most um, uh, bodies like yourself are, I'm seeing a common theme, are struggling with. So just to go back in 2020, just the group endorsed its APEC TWG strategic plan 2020 to 2024, covering for priority areas for digital transformation, human capital development, travel and facilitation, competitiveness, sustainable tourism, and economic growth. So, why was this strategic plan done? Why tourism? Do you think tourism development is one of the solutions to reboot the economy of the region amid these crises? Could you please elaborate on it?
Yeah, for us all across the region, tourism is one of the most important sectors. Yes, we focus on trade, on investment, but it's all linked. And because of how it is so linked, and it is also the benefits that come from not just one part of the economy, it links the small and medium enterprises, it links women in the economy. So it has got a lot of linkages. So it's very important that we focus on tourism. And that's why the strategic plan, it cuts across. The strategic plan is very broad in that, you're not just focusing on the business side of things, but we're also looking at building capacity. And that is an important part of the strategic plan. Just to take a couple of steps back for a while, the tourism industry, as we saw how it happened in COVID, was the first sector to really suffer because of the closure of borders. And we see that it will take a long time for it to recover. But having said that, there are two aspects of the tourism sector, if you wish. One is the domestic part of the tourism industry. The other is the international part, where you're open to foreign tourists, right? So you have to get at it now when you're talking of what do we do? How do we look at bringing about recovery in the sector? We have to look at it from two perspectives. One is domestic tourism. However small or large your economy, there is potential for domestic tourism. So how do we generate tourism, domestic tourism? Clearly, there's going to be pent up demand the moment borders are open, so dealing with that also. So then there's the opening of borders for foreign travel, for international travel. So even as we're looking at all these aspects, I think let's see what we can do in the short term. In the short term, like pick an economy like Singapore, for example. I mean, when you think of Singapore, there's not much domestic tourism, but you'd be surprised how, with innovation and thinking through with industry, government policymakers with industry, there's so much of it's interesting to see how much domestic tourism is going on in this economy, where folks, yes, Singapore Airlines has been, in a way badly affected because there's no domestic.
Right.
You don't have domestic flights.
Right.
No such thing. But having said that, the ingenuity of the folks, how they manage this to still have the industry going. It's so there's taking just this one example of how APEC economies can learn from one member. I live here and I see how they're encouraging domestic tourism. There is that opportunity, whether you call them staycations, they call them cruisecations, yachtcations, capitalizing, making best use of your resources. I think that's the value that APEC brings, the opportunity for us to learn from each other, because we can experience it, we can share, we can see how it's being done. Let me just also share this. New Zealand, this year is New Zealand's year. New Zealand is the chair of APEC. The plus, if it wasn't for COVID, we'll all be there and in providing, and New Zealand will have that opportunity to share the best of New Zealand with the 21 economies, the 20 economies. But what happened with APEC, we all can't travel. So all our meetings are now virtual, right? But New Zealand has, again, used innovation, ingenuity to try and bring to us that experience of being in New Zealand, although it's in a virtual format. So our meetings are there, virtual meetings, but they manage to share aspects of the beauty, the culture, the country, the economy with us. So what's happening essentially is you're building this expectation, you're building a demand for when the borders are open, folks will be saying, okay, I saw this and, I experienced this during the meeting, although virtually, so now is the opportunity for me to do it physically. So there's all this, it's not just because we are operating in a virtual world that tourism is dead. No, actually what you're doing is you're building up the potential, you're capitalizing, you're leveraging on this, the potential that's there.
That's very well said, building up the potential and leveraging. Two very, very powerful statements. And this is kind of is given, taken for granted, this potential will be built up, but the actions, the activations around that, I think is key. So planning for the future starts with building, like what you said, on what we know about the relationships between biodiversity, tourism, and health. Those relationships can be uncertain, subject to change, and often loosely coupled. The challenges ahead are difficult and globally affecting many protected areas. The livelihoods of many people depend on these and influencing visitor experience. Addressing these challenges in post-COVID-19 world provides an opportunity to reframe nature-based tourism and outdoor recreation to be more attentive to these dimensions. Could you please share with us Apec's sustainable tourism development tools? What were its achievements, and what does the future look like?
Yeah, well, we are very conscious of the fact that the tourism sector has to really be aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So when you're looking at the tourism strategic plan, we cannot ignore the sustainability part of it. So that has been worked in to the strategic plan for 2020-2024. And it was interesting just, when you were drawing up this plan, and just as you're going to talk about it, COVID happens. And that drives home even more the significance of ensuring sustainability. And, the fact that COVID has really, had such an impact on the industry in such a big way. But having said that, you also saw that with COVID, because people were not traveling, nature sort of came back. We saw that, for example, I'm using Singapore as an example here. The otters have come back to the parks, the birds have come back. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. And then again, an opportunity for us to take advantage of this. So, I was at another session also on tourism, and they were talking about, what do we do, now that, how do you figure sustainability? Okay, I think, and that is embedded in the strategic plan, the human development part, the human capital development part. So this is an opportunity for us to relook at how we prepare our tourists, what you call those tour guides. That's one. How do you prepare them to look at tourism now from a very sustainable perspective? That's one. Two, this is also because the tourists are not here. It's an opportunity for us and policymakers and governments, and also the private sector, to start investing in our tourist sites, right? To ensure that they're more sustainable, so that when the borders open, that becomes the anchor for us to promote tourism in a very sustainable way. Let's take an example of the Boracay, the island in Philippines. Because of tourists, they had so much tourism coming and what you call tourists coming into the island, it became a problem, right? So they took the very tough stand of closing it. So that was pre-COVID. Right. But I think there's a lesson there. They closed the island for 6 months and they, focused on cleaning it up, bringing back, making it more sustainable. And when they opened it, this again is pre-COVID, right? They had so much of positive feedback, and the industry came back. So looking at that, it's a different a different time, a different scenario, but you look at what the potential there is for us to use this time to rebuild, to make sure our tourism sites are more sustainable, to prepare the ground, to prepare the folks involved in the industry for when it comes back. And when we come back sustainably. I think that's the opportunity for us during this difficult time.
So it's time to figure out and invest in sustainability. It gives us that window to okay.
Yep.
So just changing gears a little bit here, as nations continue to accelerate the speed of their vaccination campaigns, signaling shorter time frames for reaching 70% inoculation, the Asian continent has been seen a significant improvement in its rollout, with China expected to achieve herd immunity by 2022 compared to 2025 plus expected last week's. Other Asia Pacific nations such as Indonesia and Australia have also managed to reduce their herd immunity timeframes as their vaccine rollouts have become more streamlined and efficient. In Europe, Russia and France have picked up the pace since last week's and now expected to inoculate 70% of their populations by mid 2021. But at the same time, only last night I heard the news that Pfizer is already talking about a third dosage that may be required within 1 year of the second dosage. Yeah. So how do you see the impact of the vaccine passport for international travel? Do you think that this will be a saving grace from all of this confusion and uncertainty?
Yeah, it's interesting that we're now looking at a vaccine passport. For some of us who are older, we remember that when you travel to certain countries, certain economies, you need to get the yellow fever jab. Remember?
Exactly.
That comes a little booklet that you must carry with you for 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. So in that sense, I mean, it's not novel, it's not new, this whole idea. But sometimes the way we present it as if it's so novel, it's so new, we're breaking new ground, we've done it before. So, but there are concerns, of course, when we talk of the vaccine and international travel. One is we must make sure privacy, data privacy, especially in this environment, data privacy, because it's health information. So how do the policymakers have to work together with international organizations to ensure that this aspect of data privacy is always uppermost in all the policies that they make, they embark on. The second is, this is a concern because it is not even, the rollout of the vaccine is not even. So there is this inequality in that sense. So how do we manage that? That's the second concern. And tied to this is the fact that if you're looking at a passport, a vaccination, digital vaccination, or certificate, whatever it is, one must be very careful to ensure that it is not a precondition for movement of people. I think when that becomes a precondition, there, because of the inequalities, because of the differences in access to the vaccines, you may discriminate, and you don't want to be able to do that. So that in that context, therefore, the international collaboration is important when we're thinking of a mechanism to deal with vaccines. And I must say that in Apec, we're doing something about it. There's a study being done because we really need to look across the 21 economies, how it's being managed. That's one. And then we're also seriously having those conversations about how do we get to the stage where we can start opening our borders? What kind of protocols should we have in place? So that conversation is ongoing. And we realize how important it is now that the vaccination is being administered across the region, but having this inequality, how do you manage that inequality as well? So very, very much a work in progress, but it's heartening to know that it is being taken very, very seriously, not just by policymakers, but the business community, as well as understanding that the impact will be on the average person.
Right.
Of course, everybody is very focused. But the earlier days, early days of this, everyone was focused on how do you get business going, how do you get business people traveling, But I think now we've seen how with the rollout of vaccinations, we can have this more broad-based. Right. So that is a conversation that's going on.
But do you think
yes.
A vaccine passport, it's going to be, so the skeptics say it may complicate things further, than making it easy. And there is, right now, you don't need further complications.
That's right. I think this conversation must be had. You must have this and it's important to bring in experts, bring in the health experts, the international bodies. Like I said, we take for granted the yellow fever, right, certificate that we carry with us. We take it for granted. But I'm sure in the earlier days, and that was pre the digital world, at the end of the day, it's the engagement with the international health bodies, international communities to ensure that yes, there's some way of recognizing this, but with the notion that you cannot use it to discriminate as well. So there's a lot to be done. Yeah, in that sense, while I say it's not new, we've done it before, but in the sense of this pandemic, then it's novel,
Okay, so it's not something novel. It's an old idea, perhaps, but perhaps a little bit more sophistication because there's digitization, right. There's approach is different. Okay.
And now because of data, how the flow of data, so we have to also take that into account.
Yeah, data privacy. I think that's on top of everybody's mind. That how do you protect that data? So countries in Asia Pacific remain largely closed to international visitors, with relatively few lifting of travel restrictions, even as infection rates plummet. As a result, the Asia Pacific region will record the biggest drop in international arrivals in all regions at 83%. Can you give us a sense if, when, and how Apec economies will start recovering? What are you have your finger on the pulse with some of these governments of your 21 economies. What is your sense? What are you hearing? Tell us. Is that also recovery? I guess will be uneven as well, right? From differing, so which region countries come in first?
Thanks, Samara. This is something that is a top of mind for all of us when we have our meetings. How do we ensure that there is recovery? The recovery is sustained, is also sustainable, and how do we ensure that we accept that it will be uneven recovery, but how do we make sure that it is still inclusive? So those are questions that we are thinking through. So the one big conversation is on value chains and supply chains, how interconnected we are, and when we grow, we all grow together. So rising tides, that kind of approach. So it's not about beggar your neighbor, but really how do we help each other grow? So there's work that's being done on, even as we're looking at recovery, but there's special areas, the focus areas of making sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we need to make sure there's a flow of essential goods, of medical goods that must continue, inputs into your vaccines and medical supplies, those raw materials, those inputs. We must ensure that there is market access for this, that we're not putting unnecessary barriers. So a lot of conversations are taking place at different levels on the non-tariff side to ensure that we keep our our borders open for the flow of these goods. So customs will be are having their own conversation to ensure that we don't put unnecessary barriers to the flow of goods. We understand that, in times of emergency, the WTO, the World Trade Organization rules allow for us to put in some form of restrictions. But the important thing here is to ensure that we are transparent, that the rules are predictable, and it's important that it's temporary. It's only for this period. So folks know that when the pandemic is over, when our emergencies are over, those barriers will be removed. But even as we do that, we want to ensure that for essential goods, this will be done. And there is, I must say, in APEC, there is political will. This has been stated many times. So there is a way for us also to have those regular conversations about making sure our customs, at the border will allow the flow of these goods. So there's a lot. I mean, there's so much that we need to do to work towards recovery. So, and that's being done by the different bodies within APEC. The ministers, when they meet, they have these conversations also about how important it is for us to help each other to recover. And very important that the recovery, as I said earlier, is sustainable and inclusive, so that it is not just the big companies that can benefit from the way we, our rules and regulations and how we open our markets, but make sure that the SMEs, they've been badly affected by the closures, So how do we make sure that these SMEs,
so protect
folks tell you, they go online, everybody says, they should go online. How do we help them to go online so that they can sell their products? So a lot of work is being done. We have the different groups in APEC. The SME working group is doing its bit. That we have the logistics folks through the transport working groups. We have the customs. So all these people are working, or the different groups are working. It's how we align them and ensure that we all are on the same page. I think that's what will determine our road to recovery at the end of it. Yeah.
And I think organizations yourself sit at the cusp of such conversations and dialogues. That's because you can see all across the verticals how the conversations are going and bringing it together. So that's, I think, that is your key role and quite commendable. So pre-COVID-19 situation, business was booming. Aircraft sales were high. Passengers numbers were on the increase, especially in Asia Pacific region. Airports were rushing to expand the existing infrastructure while developers and governments looking to build new airports. Within a few months, the pandemic has caused such an impact on the aviation industry due to travel restrictions, leading to the collapse in demand among travelers. Recovery will take many shapes and forms, but will depend on the creation of, now with the new buzzwords are travel corridors, air bridges, travel bubbles, green lanes, and most of all, passenger confidence. How does APEC facilitate and navigate through all of that, that while enhancing safety and security?
One of the positives in APEC is that the policymakers don't work in a vacuum. It's not just the policymakers talking among themselves, and I think that is important. We have the APEC Business Advisory Council. They have a key role in engaging the policymakers to provide their ideas of how this can be done and how we can facilitate this. So they come to the table, they meet regularly with the senior officials, the policymakers, and they share their perspectives on how things can be done, how they see us, getting out of this challenges, getting out of this crisis in that sense. How do we make life a bit easier for businesses? That's one. The other group that we engage with also, and they're part and parcel of APEC, is we have the policy, the APEC Policy Support Unit. They help us with the research that we need to do. Besides that, we also have the Pacific Economic PECC, just PECC, PEC. PEC is also like our think tank. They existed before APEC, the Pacific Economic Cooperation. They also bring ideas from the civil society think tank perspective, track 2 perspective. And that's the kind of inputs that you get on a regular basis. And so the policymakers then have a better perspective of what would be good for us as we track recovery, So it's not just policymakers having chats among themselves. And also when we have our meetings, our working group meetings, we have international bodies that come in as well and share their own ideas of what has worked for them, what hasn't. The thing about APEC also is that we're non-binding. So because we're non-binding, we don't have agreements as such, but we have principles and best endeavor to implement those principles if you see fit. And that the sharing of the best practices to say how, because of these principles that you've put in place and we've assimilated them, we've aligned them with our own policies, here's how it has worked. So that sort of conversation has been very helpful for the 21 economies.
So again, I think your verticals, cross-pollination across the verticals is helping you to help these economies navigate themselves out of the situation onto the recovery phase. But still, there's no clear one path to recovery. It's very clear that it's it's a multitude of many multifaceted approach which is going to help through it. Okay. Yeah. So over the next decade, it is estimated approximately 70% of new value created in the economy will be based on digitally enabled platforms. Depending on the definition of digital economy, current estimates of the size of this industry range from 4.5% to 15.5% of the global GDP. Going virtual is a current trend in the COVID-19 era. Is there any platform for APEC members to strengthen their network? What it is?
When you talk of platform, do you mean an IT platform, or do you mean a mechanism for us to have that?
I would say the mechanism.
The mechanism. Yeah, I mean, we you see the challenge with a virtual format, and what we miss is a human touch, right? And so yes, what we've tried to have we've experimented with different ways of engaging with each other in spite of doing things virtually. So even at I remember the last meeting when we had the meeting with the business community, what New Zealand has been really being very innovative in that they used the platform to bring us into smaller groups. So you could have smaller group discussions and then come back to plenary. So it's that kind of, trying to substitute the human element. What we've also had to do is to have a lot more bilaterals. When you meet in a physical environment, you can have pull-asides, you can have a cup of coffee and have that discussion. We miss that so much. But having said that, what we've substituted that with is to have more virtual meetings, bilateral meetings, smaller group meetings, to help build that network, that that sense of camaraderie that we miss so much. Really we do.
And
I know. Sorry, go ahead.
It's also the speed to meetings has increased. So you can, within the same time frame, perhaps do more of these.
Yeah. But in my case, I think it has been an advantage because, when you travel to meetings, because of the time it takes, you're limited by the number of meetings that you can sit in. Because, APEC has a number of working groups. Sometimes they go on, back to back. But because it's virtual, I get an opportunity to sit in at more of these virtual meetings. So that also has been a benefit in that sense. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the goal of human resource development in APEC is to promote the well-being of all people and achieve sustainable and inclusive economic growth in the region. That's quite apparent from what you've said so far. Education is the base for all sustainable development. How is APEC supporting professional benchmarks for tourism authorities, private sectors, and rural communities?
You know, APEC, in a sense, has three pillars: the trade and investment pillar, the human and the human the different working groups, the ministerials, the leaders. But one very important pillar is the capacity building pillar. So, and I must say, the economies contribute a lot of funds to ensure that we have we focus on our capacity building of our policymakers, of our SMEs, of our women in the economy. So, likewise for the tourism sector, also, you know, that it's key part of the strategic plan, anyways. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity for policymakers, for governments to invest in building the capacity of those SMEs involved in the industry, of tour guides. You know, there's so many aspects of this, of your transport people, your food F&B providers. I mean, there's so much that can be done during this period to help build the capacity, so that when borders open, you can hit the road running. Also, and another important aspect of this is working with certain businesses to help the smaller tourism players grow. Let me give an example. Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind, if we use certain, names of companies, like for example, Airbnb, it's very established. They have their database of who uses the sense of who uses this facility. Then in smaller economies like Malaysia, for example, you have this concept of homestay. Mm-hmm. So, and we found, I think over this pandemic, when people travel now, they're more conscious and they want to be in smaller, facilities rather than big crowded places. So preparing those homestay, who are mainly in the rural area and things like that, how can they upgrade their facilities there, to make it of some better standard? Mm-hmm. When you compare that to, say, how B&B is managing, so having that sort of collaboration to build the capacity of this smaller entities, smaller tourism entities, tapping on the experience of, I think that is where also, that's what we mean by, education in the broader sense, building capacity in this broader sense, not just on focusing on say the tour guides, but even going right down to those little villages and helping those who are involved in homestay, things like that. Yeah.
So that kind of you are spot on with that, because we've seen a trend, and there's a lot of surveys have been done in community tourism.
Yes.
Immersive tourism. That's right. The terminology that we are using for that kind of. So people want to immerse themselves in very one-on-one experiences. Excuse me. So every crisis creates opportunity. What are the opportunities here for the recovery? Because recovery requires that we collaborate and work together, and the desire for thriving businesses, healthy ecosystems, resilient livelihoods. So how do you see that?
As I said, it's really using this time, taking this time for reflection to see how we can be more sustainable. I think that's the value. This is almost God-given, in a time like this, when you're busy going from one to another, you really don't have that time to step back and think and reflect and see how you can do better. And I think this is something that has been, it's a silver lining in spite of the crisis, that we have this opportunity to really look at how we want to redesign our tourism sector. So I think, this it's not an opportunity to be wasted.
And finally, what is your message, to end to our listeners, to the stakeholders of the travel and tourism industry in Asia, in Africa, and the rest of the world?
I think for me, it's like I keep saying, this is the opportunity that should not be wasted. And this is the time to really get back to the drawing board to some extent and see how we can be more sustainable going forward, with the focus on sustainable development, sustainable ways of working, sustainable ways of doing business, preparing our small and medium enterprises to be more sustainable. How do we use the digital tools that we have more effectively, for governments to make sure the infrastructure, the ecosystem is in place, so that when we open up, we really are able to take full advantage of the ground that we've prepared for the industry. I think it's time that should not be wasted. It's time that we focus on what needs to be done rather than bemoaning what we had in the past. So going forward, looking forward to take advantage of, because when we come back, the mindset of the tourists too will be different. We've seen what can happen. So I'm sure the tourists coming back will be more focused on quality of life, quality, a more sustainable way of enjoying the facilities. So I think this is that time. So if anything, I want to leave with you is that let's see how we can come back stronger and more sustainably and more inclusively.
And I feel also I detect certain urgency to this time, because this time will not last. And I think, so it's a time to redefine our priorities as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Rebecca Fatima Santa Maria. It's clear to me from what you've shared with us today that it is clear that Apec members pursue measures to reduce the time, cost, and uncertainty of doing business in the region and open new economic opportunities, including for small businesses, women, and youth. Apec's tourism agenda supports the development and harmonization of policies that improve market access and efficiency, and hopefully uphold public interests such as safeguarding of health and safety within the tourism industry in today's time and moment that we are in. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us, and hopefully we meet again in better times.
Yes, we look forward to having that meeting again. Yeah, thank you.
Face to face, hopefully.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Thank you.